Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Akinwolere. This season, plenty of managers have talked themselves into trouble. Oliver Glasner angered Crystal Palace fans by telling them to stay humble. And Ruben Amorim got sacked shortly after public criticism of Manchester United. So just how powerful are a manager's words? So, joining us for this one, football language supremo, Charlie Eccleshare. We've also got Jack Pitt-Brooke, who has seen his fair share of rants from Spurs managers over the years as well. All right, gents, let's start with a recent example, because last week, Crystal Palace manager Oliver Glasner started a war of words with the fans. He said, "I always said the most important thing is stay humble. And it's the same for the fans. Never forget where you're coming from. I think a few who are so critical are not so humble and forgot where they came from." So the context of this, obviously, is that Glasner delivered the club's first ever major trophy. But then he revealed that he was also leaving at the end of the season. Slight hypocrisy here, Charlie?
I mean, it's definitely an unusual situation for a manager to trail their exit so long in advance. I guess his worry was that it was going to leak and then he wouldn't sort of be in control of the narrative, which is, a big part of it, whether you're a football manager or a politician or whatever. And then the stay humble thing is, it's really difficult because I listened to what he was saying where he kind of listed out his achievements at the club and went into quite granular detail about like the number of points that Palace had after that number of games in the previous 10 years and where they ranked and all this stuff. And I do think, I understand a manager's temptation to do that sort of thing. The problem is it? I feel like a bit like with a politician, ramming your achievements down people's throats doesn't always work particularly well. Like, especially football fans, we're emotional. Like, that's how you kind of connect with us. And so I think, saying, I don't know how many Crystal Palace fans will go away from that and be like, to be fair, he is right. Like in 7 of the 9 previous seasons, we have had fewer points after 27 games. What might resonate will be the classic rallying cry or whatever. But I can see from his point of view, he does want to remind them, and everyone, I guess, because it's not just fans he's speaking to. He probably thinks he's talking to a wider audience, that he has done a pretty incredible job. And it wasn't long ago that they did have, the best day in the club's history.
Yeah, I do think about that. And I wonder what he's trying to achieve, whether it's just an honest reaction, Jack, because, I mean, based on recent history, he's Palace's most successful ever manager, really, if you think about it. But this is also someone looking for work elsewhere, right? I mean, what kind of PR is this for a potential employer?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Like, he's obviously, objectively, he has done a fantastic job at Palace. And yet, I think that what fans obviously want a manager who wants to be there. And I think that while to an extent, I think fans will have sympathy with the manager who's complaining about transfer business. And obviously Glasner's done a lot of complaining about transfers over the course of this season. Ultimately, I think fans want to know that the manager is willing to kind of muck in and get his hands dirty and try and hold everything together. And I don't think that's not the impression that I've got from the outside watching Glasner recently. I think that Glasner the toys have clearly gone out of the pram, and I think that it kind of feels to me like he is engaging too much in a PR war with the Palace board, in a way that I think fans think, well, I mean, ultimately fans are still showing up, buying tickets, going to the games, and they want to see a manager who's kind of pulling in the same direction. And they also know that while it's true that he has done a really good job, fans hate any sense, even an unstated sense, that they're lucky to have the manager. I think we're going to talk about Antonio Conte later, but there was always, when Conte was at Tottenham, there was always this sense in the background, which Conte didn't mind leaning on, which was, you guys are lucky to have me. I'm so good. You guys have not been great recently, but I'm here, and isn't that great news for you that I've shown up to manage your team? And like fans don't like that at all. Like they never have done. And I think that Glasner has, whether intentionally or not, and whether stated or not, has clearly kind of led into that sense, I think, over the last few months. And I think it's totally understandable that fans would bristle at that.
Yeah, Charlie, the Glasner thing's really interesting because, much has been made of, obviously, the exits that have happened at Crystal Palace, and he's cut a really unrested personality since, obviously, the trophies that they've won. They've lost Gahey, they've lost Eze in many respects, but he must have known the situation he's walking into at Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace aren't ever really the greatest spenders in the Premier League, so this idea of staying humble, I mean, the club is humble, but they're also enjoying where they are in this current place in time. And also, he, dare I say it, could be blamed for causing a sadness in a club that were actually jubilant this time last season.
Yeah, but I do think, as we touched upon, part of the audience is the kind of wider footballing audience, sporting directors at other clubs and what have you. And don't underestimate as well, although he would have known that deep down. I think managers always think that through their sort of force of personality and will, they can do something different at a club, even though the story of that club may be well written or established in people's minds. Look at every Tottenham manager who goes in thinking that they're going to be the one who does something different. And Jack mentioned Antonio Conte, and I think that is a really great point because it's spot on. He always gave the impression it was, slightly beneath him, that they were lucky to have him. There was a slight element of that you got from Mourinho as well. He was certainly happy to remind you of his credentials and how much greater they were than the club's. But it's interesting as well because I know that teams, when they're appointing managers, they will look at their media relations because, as we're talking about, they give because there are so many games now, they give so many press conferences and they're the only person who we hear from at a club. So it's so about this. So it may end up being slightly short-sighted from Glasner because if you are looking at his media relations, you might stop and question, well, he has massively fallen out with a fan base where he gave them their best day not that long ago. Is that a red flag for some clubs, for whom there's going to be if he wants to move to a bigger, in inverted commas, club than Palace, there's going to be a lot more scrutiny on his press conferences and on every word he says.
Yeah. Can we talk about Ange Postecoglou, Jack? A man that was brought in many respects to unite the board and the fans because he's straight talking, very pragmatic, and sort of in my eyes, sort of spoke to me as a football fan. But also, in fairness, he's also backed himself quite publicly as well, especially when the chips were down for him with the press. That famous, I always win a second trophy in my second season, mate, or I always win a trophy in my second season, mate. He blows his own trumpet quite easily as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen this in the last week or two when he's gone on the Stick to Football podcast. And you just I thought those appearances were a reminder of the fact that I don't really think there's anybody in Postecoglou's league when it comes to being able to talk convincingly and sell a narrative to the world about him and his work. And just to connect with people as well. Like I think that you can't really analyze the work that he's done in his career purely in terms of the football itself. It's more than just the football. Like we can talk. People talk a lot about Ange Ball, but I think the whole kind of Postecoglou management experience, it does rest an awful lot on his ability to. It's not. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it's just salesmanship because I think it's more than that. It's also. I think he has a real ability to explain in a convincing way what he's trying to do, the sort of football he's trying to play, without ever getting bogged down in jargon, without ever sounding like he's talking down to people. I think it's a real kind of politician skill, that being able to explain, being able to explain his methods and his strategic goals in a way which people can easily understand, and which can bring people along with him, both the people he works with inside the club, whether that's players and staff, or people in the outside world, fans and media and so on. So I think it's a really unique gift that he has, and I think that I don't think you can analyze any of the work that he's done independent of that ability to talk convincingly in public day after day after day.
Charlie, just from the work you've been doing on Ange and looking into the way he speaks as well, do you think it's by design or is it just who he is, mate? Sorry, I had to do it.
Yeah, I remember speaking to someone who worked with him, because what's interesting about Ange is when he was kind of in the wilderness early on in his managerial career, he did punditry work, and that was what got him back into the kind of consciousness of Australian football, because they were like, oh, this guy's a great talker. And one of the guys who worked with him at Fox Sports said to me that they thought the fact that he'd done that did give him a real sense of how the media worked. So he could kind of see it from both sides. I think a lot of football managers don't really know what the point of the media is in a way, or like either don't know or don't really want to know, don't care, and just see it as like, oh, this is a mandatory thing I've got to do before every game. He was very aware of, you know, what the point was and how to connect with people. But I also think a lot of that is natural. You know, he was captain of South Melbourne when he was like, you know, in his 20s. He had those natural leadership skills as well. So I think the kind of natural charisma and charm coupled with the intelligence to kind of work out how that could be most effective is sort of the secret behind his oratorical success.
Yeah, is it about authenticity, Jack? You know, Glasner could be said to be overly authentic. So can Ange Postecoglou. But then you look at someone like Michael Carrick, probably not managing, more of an interim head coach right now. But, you know, he's just very straight to the point. No frills, Jack, but gets the job done on the field. And that's what does the talking.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that authenticity is really important in terms of how managers connect with fans. I think the one thing fans don't want, they don't like jargon, and they also don't like the sense that the wool is being pulled over their eyes. And that's difficult, obviously, because there is clearly such a thing as I think there is arguably such a thing as too much honesty. You know, like, I mean, I know we'll come to Amorim
The Ruben
later.
Amorim law.
Exactly.
Yeah, we'll
like
talk about Amorim in a sec, yeah.
Amorim in his particularly that first year at United, he had no qualms about saying how bad they were. And I think to an extent fans like that, although I think I
think rival fans like it more. Like, it was hilarious for everyone else.
That's certainly true. I also think it arguably undermines your ability to bring everybody with you, because you also have to, like, people want a story, but they also want a positive story. Like, they want to know that they want to know that you have the answers. They want to know that you are leading them in the right direction. I think that, you know, where a lot of managers, that's like where Klopp was so amazing. Like, Klopp was so good at convincing the whole Liverpool community from as soon as he took that job that he was going to lead them into the right direction, you know, doubters to believers, as he's put it, and that shared belief that they had in him and in his methods meant that they could ride out some pretty choppy moments in the first few years before things really clicked. So it's a balance, but I think it's a balance that has to be underpinned by authenticity, and that the authenticity is one of those things that is, if you lose it, or if you don't have it, as hard as it is to quantify, it's very hard to ever kind of win it back.
He and Ange, I do think, are really good examples of how much easier it is to speak well in inverted commas when you're winning. Like Klopp, when he was winning, when Liverpool were doing well, like, yes, in that early period he was great at telling a story, but he was amazing when he was winning. He was this charming, gregarious guy. He was really quite nasty often when things weren't going well. You know, I remember myself asking him a very innocent question after they'd drawn with Spurs to basically lose the league in 2022. He gave me a really quite spiky, unnecessarily so answer. And Ange was, you know, amazing, you know, when things were going well. He was naturally less good when they weren't. And I think, like, these things, they're really important around the edges, but ultimately you are at the mercy of your results to a certain extent, and it's far easier to be humble and generous and all of those things when you're doing well than when you're on the back foot and naturally you go on the attack and lash out, a bit like Glasner has here, because, you know, he feels attacked to a certain extent and he's defending himself.
Well, let's talk about managers getting themselves the sack. In the lead up to Ruben Amorim's dismissal by Manchester United in January, he said, "I just want to say I came here to be manager, not to be the coach." Questioning the hierarchy is never a good idea, is it, Jack?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think Amorim's results were probably survivable. Like, Amorim's results at the start of this season for United were not that bad. Like, they were, you know, they've obviously improved under Carrick, but I think they were probably roughly around par. But clearly he decided to go to war with the hierarchy, and he made comments about, which were clearly kind of airing dirty laundry in public after discussions he'd had internally with Jason Wilcox. And that really was what led to his dismissal. I think the same thing's true of Enzo Maresca. Like, Chelsea were in a bad spell when he got sacked, but I don't think he got sacked. I don't feel like he got sacked because of results. I feel like he got sacked because he effectively criticized the hierarchy in public. Like, he wasn't quite as blunt as Amorim, but he made those comments about, this has been the worst 48 hours since I've been here. And, everybody knows what he was getting at there. He'd clearly been issues behind the scenes. And so I think in both those cases, Amorim and Maresca, you see that as soon as a manager stops towing the line in public, as soon as a manager stops uniting everyone and starts trying to kind of fling mud around in public against his employers, that's when he's in a difficult situation. So yeah, it's clearly like in both those cases, it's what they said in public, I think, ultimately that did for them.
Yeah, if we're talking Ange, Charlie, Ange was similar, when he talked about what was going on behind the scenes at Tottenham, and I think the debate was around whether or not they wanted to throw a game away so Arsenal would win the league, against Manchester City, which I thought was really fascinating considering he was a manager under pressure at that time. Is it often a flick that certain people, a switch that certain people flick, if they know it's probably time to go, and actually I know that the writing's on the wall here?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, don't underestimate as well how much emotion comes into it, because what I love about manager press conferences is that, yes, they may be briefed to within an inch of their lives by club press officers and whatever to say the right thing. There are times when they're just going to go rogue because they're emotional and they're angry, especially the post-match ones where you often get the kind of most explosive ones, like we'll talk about the Conte Southampton one. And Ange actually, that was really interesting, the Arsenal Man City kind of triangle thing that was going on, because throughout his managerial career, and especially that first season with Spurs, he's word perfect when it comes to the fans and uniting the fans. That they're talking about let them dream. I'm never going to tell fans what to think. All of this stuff, amazing. And it was music to fans' ears early on. But he was just so angry about that whole thing. He couldn't help himself. I think he said it was the most upset he's ever been as a manager at a game, that 2-0 home defeat to City in May 2024, when a lot of the fans were wanting Spurs to lose the game. So it's not always as sort of calculated. There are times when it is, and maybe Amorim, because some of Amorim's ones were pre-match press conferences where he clearly had thought about it, and I guess was to kind of last desperate roll of the dice. It is almost like a back me or sack me. But I think, yeah, Amorim's such an interesting case because for reporters and for non-fans of Manchester United, he was amazing. He was a gift. There were times you'd hear his quotes and you were like, is that a podcaster talking or is that the manager of Manchester United? I mean, this is just incredibly punchy sort of pod topic material. You turn on and be like, Amorim says this is the worst Manchester United team in history. That's a discussion point for a pod, not a kind of the manager. And so I think you can understand there why clubs are quite careful about what their managers say, because a lot of that stuff, that can't be very helpful internally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, Jack, let's talk about Antonio Conte. That infamous press conference where he basically got himself sacked following an incredible rant against the players and also the club, saying Tottenham story is this: 20 years, there is this owner and they never won something. Can you just relive that moment for us, please, Jack?
Yeah, it was amazing. So he came in after, I think Spurs they were 3-1 up in the second half of that game at Saints. And I think if they'd won, they would have gone third, I think. They were not in a bad position at all. But they threw it away. They conceded twice at the end, I think, a very, very late penalty to make it 3-3. And he just blew up. He was so... He kind of threw everyone under the bus, including all the players. I remember writing, normally the players, it's the manager loses the players, but in this case, Conte wanted to make it very clear to the public that the players had lost his confidence rather than the other way around. I think the context you have to remember here is that Conte was coming to the end of his contract. He made it very clear for a long time he didn't want to sign a new one. I think by this point, Tottenham also did not want him to sign they didn't want Conte to stay on anyway because they knew that his heart wasn't in it. So what's the point? So he was always going to go at the end of that season. It was completely clear by that point. And they'd just been knocked out of the Champions League in incredibly miserable fashion to AC Milan, where they did basically nothing at all. And instead, a second home leg did nothing at all. And there was such a sense of, what's the point of this anymore? Why are we still going through the motions? If he doesn't want to be here, and he clearly doesn't want to be here, what is anybody gaining from any of this? So I think that he just decided, I've had enough. I'm going to get my retaliation in early. I'm going to, if I do, I think he must have known that this would lead to his sacking. It wasn't imminent. Sorry, it wasn't immediate straight after. He went back to Italy. It was an international break. I think it was another maybe 8 days. 8 or 9 days until he actually got terminated. But yeah, I think he was very. No, I know he's an emotional guy, and there was obviously a lot of emotion there. But I also think, on one level, it was a quite knowing, burning of his bridges, to get himself out of the end of that season.
Well, let's talk about high performance speak now, because it's definitely something that's crept into football over the last few years. And social media has had an absolute field day with Rosenior when he joined Chelsea. When he was managing in France, he said the following: in English, the word manage, if you split the two words, is man and age. You're aging men. I don't know, people maybe have a go at it, but it shouldn't be frowned at that actually this probably is a new modern star that we're seeing based on everything else that's around. TED Talks, podcasts, and all these coaches and managers are listening to these things in terms of getting those incremental gains for their team.
Yeah, I think TED Talks is exactly the right thing to identify. I just think there's a big kind of best practice culture in coaching nowadays, where coaches will do a lot of research in all sorts of different fields that they might not have, that managers might not have looked into 10, 20, 30 years ago. And, psychology and motivation being a really big part of that. And, managers, or at least successful managers, are very curious, and they do try and cast the net wide, learn as much as they can. And so naturally, things that they learn, things they hear about, they are going to try and bring into their management. And obviously, on one level, it's slightly jarring if you've grown up with the kind of different era of management, but equally, these are guys who are, the first thing they think about in the morning is always, how can I get through to the players today? How can I, because that's really what it comes down to, right? It's how can I spark a reaction out of the guys? How can I just get an extra bit of engagement from them, get an extra bit of commitment from them? How can I convince them to buy into what I'm doing and to the rest of the teammates? And so they are going to do things that maybe from the outside people might think look a little bit cringy, but if you're a manager in that situation, you are going to try any tactic you can just to try and bring those players along with you.
Is that what it looks like, Charlie? It looks cringy to us mere football fans who just want our team to bloody score goals.
Yeah, but also I think there might be an age thing here as well, a man age thing. We are all reared on The Office and Partridge and Peep Show, and we find all this stuff incredibly painful. I'm not sure that's true of younger people necessarily. And I do also think it's hard because it comes back to that authenticity thing. I think there's a suspicion of cynics like us in the media of, well, this reeks of kind of straight out of a LinkedIn coaching manual kind of thing. But ultimately, it's fair enough for managers to be curious and, look at how people in different industries and whatever speak. I think that's sort of fine. But I think it does, for a lot of people, it suggests insincerity. And for other people, and I think this is unfair, it suggests a little bit ideas above your station, stay in your lane. You're a football manager. You're not a kind of motivational speaker or whatever, even though there is such a clear overlap between those two things. And ultimately, like Jack says, it is just about finding ways of communicating with young people. That's all it is. And, it's far more important that it resonates with them than it does with us.
Is it an easier sell, Jack, when you're actually winning, as we've pointed out earlier? Gareth Southgate, notorious, has written 2 books on, mindsets and things like that. But look how far he took England in tournaments. Also, Mikel Arteta, with the old light bulb moments. Arsenal are firing on all cylinders at this moment in time. Obviously, if they weren't, everyone's going, why are you wasting your time on that faff?
Absolutely. ultimately our judgments of all of this stuff, and not just this stuff, but like basically every method that anyone in football uses, from coaching to motivation to recruitment to tactics, is it like we look at the results and then we decide whether or not the methods are good or bad. Like that is just like, that is a completely fundamental fact to seeing how we talk about football. And it's this, and the same way, and the same thing, and like this is so true. I mean, Arteta's probably the best example of this, but I think it's always true. Like all of this stuff about, he's done these weird motivational techniques. Like if they win the league, then the techniques are good. If they don't win the league, then the techniques are bad. Like it really is as simple as that. And that is as true for motivational techniques as it is for any other aspect of the game. And like anybody who tells you that that these particular methods are good independent of the results on the pitch is trying to pull the wool over your eyes.
Yeah, this brings me to my next question, really, Jack, is that, should managers be boring or clear or just less animated, maybe like a Michael Carrick, or should they be a bit more like our Ange Postecoglou? From a journalistic point of view, surely an Ange gives you way more headlines and more to talk about than just a straight answer that's like, yeah, we played well today, just got the basics right. Let's go on to the next one.
Oh yeah, all journalists want managers who give good copy, who give good answers in press conferences. I think that is universal. And that's not to say that you would necessarily like obscure your view of whether the manager was good or not, but if you're having to spend a lot of time in the company of the manager and you have to write up what they say, naturally you want them to say interesting things. I think from the manager's point of view, it's all about generating buy-in. I think that's what that more than anything is what it comes down to. That buy-in with the players and buy-in with the public. And as Charlie says, there'll be different messages for different people. Like what you say in public is not what you will say in private. But so effectively the manager is having to do two separate processes in parallel, right? The public one and the private one. But the end goal is always the same in both, which is to generate buy-in. And obviously results are part of that, but another part of that is what you say. Like you have to, and if you can prove to the players or to the fans that your methods are working, then they will be more willing to listen to what you have to say. So kind of the two things reinforce one another, both the messaging and the methods go hand in hand. So that's really what they're trying to do.
Is it important to be an orator, Charlie? Is it important to be able to court you journalists, when you're in the press conference? In reality, because, do people write more favourably towards people that are that court journalists, for instance?
You do need to have some sort of connection. And it's not even just the kind of conventional media. It's the fact that everything you say is being clipped up and aggregated and fans are poring over your every word. It just does matter. And I would say as well, Carrick benefits from the fact that he's a legendary player. So he doesn't need to have as much personality. Whereas if he was coming in and everyone was like, who's this guy managing United? And if he was less of a known thing, he would have to show more of himself. Carrick can slightly get away with not. And at the moment, because they're winning. I'm sure, like Jack says, this will be reframed if things go badly as, did he lack a little bit of personality? That's the game.
Yeah, you got me thinking of something, Charlie, when you just mentioned this sort of, clickbait or anything around that, in terms of whether or not managers now in the modern era are more conscious of their brand, especially around social media. Guardiola recently spoken about Sudan, Palestine and social issues. Vincent Kompany also, in reaction to what Jose Mourinho said after the Benfica-Real Madrid match, used that platform to really speak about racism. How aware do you think managers are now of their platform and also the power that can bring on a wider societal level?
Yeah, massively. Like managers are incredibly attuned to this. I think that this is one of the interesting things about press conferences, right? Is that obviously traditionally press conferences were really for newspapers, right? And newspapers would write up what managers said. But now in the era of kind of social media and kind of clipped, shareable videos, which obviously dominate most of the big social media platforms, I think press conferences are still as relevant as ever, right? Because if Guardiola, whether it's Guardiola, Arteta, Klopp, whoever, if they're talking about a really big topic in like, let's say, a 1 minute clip, which can then get shared around the world, then the press conference still has as much power as it has ever had, even if it's reaching people through a different medium. And I think managers are incredibly aware of that. They're incredibly aware of how quickly their words can go around the world, almost within seconds or even while they are still talking. And so, I absolutely think that's a huge part of it. And I think that managers are very, very, very conscious of the huge platform that gives them.
And, the fact that you see managers coming on and doing interviews be it on podcasts like this or be it on High Performance by Jake Humphrey, which is obviously a very divisive one. But, I think Eddie Howe's been on that, hasn't he? So that they're aware of their own personal brand and how they want to be seen. That's an opportunity for them to kind of talk about their ideals and all of that. And again, these are things that make a lot of people bristle and, don't think a manager should necessarily be doing. But of course they're going to self-promote. Like, even going on Monday Night Football, which has become this kind of, everyone know it's an unspoken thing. It's if you're an out of work manager, it's a great platform. Gary O'Neill, he really, by going on that show and by doing quite a detailed analysis of how his Wolves team had beaten Man City, that genuinely changed like public perceptions of him. And it was like, oh wow, this guy is actually tactically pretty smart. So I think, and they'll be aware of that can alter perceptions.
For sure. All right, let's leave it there, gentlemen. Really enjoyed that conversation. Jack, Charlie, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate your time. And also thank you guys for following us as well. We'll catch you soon. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.